and breathe. The first ever edition of the new Champions League group table is over. C'est fini. And wow, I feel like that went at like a million miles an hour. We were looking at so many different games at once, 64 goals flying in over the course of the night, the table changing with every single result, and some really, really interesting fixtures to look forward to in the round of 32, the round of 16, and going forward as well. Now, in this video, I'm not going to go and sit and talk about one performance or one game today because I really had my eyes everywhere. I was just trying to keep up. I'm more so going to look at the final standings, give my thoughts on that, look at the potential round of 32 games that could potentially happen. We know that on Friday, there's going to be the draw for who plays who exactly. And overall, just give my thoughts on this first phase, how I kind of thought it all went, and some of the teams that maybe impressed me, some of the teams that maybe didn't impress me, and who to look out for going forward. So let's get into this. Okay, I'm going to try and explain this as much as possible because even myself, honestly, I'm a little confused by everything, but this is how it ended up. After 8 games, the top 8 that automatically qualify to the round of 16, they do not have to play a playoff around a 32 game. That is Liverpool, who won the group despite losing today. They topped the group over Barcelona, who of course could only get a draw against Atalanta. Arsenal and Inter, both on 19 points, progress as well too. Atletico Madrid had some very difficult games this table, and they actually came through in the top 8. Bayer Leverkusen. So many people maybe thought about Bayer Leverkusen as a team that could fall off after their wonder season last year. They're in the top 8. And then the two shocks, I would say, are Lille. Lille, who played Real Madrid and beat them. Atletico Madrid and beat them, drew to Juve, narrowly lost to Liverpool. They had a difficult set of games, and yet, out of all these elite sides in Europe that we typically think of, the Real Madrids, the Bayern Munichs, the Manchester Cities, they sit in 7th, gaining immediate automatic qualification to the round of 16. And they are, of course, rounded up by Aston Villa, who big win at home to Celtic. I'm going to make another video talking about the John Duran and Ollie Watkins situation in terms of transfers, but they got the win they needed today against Celtic with Morgan Rogers scoring his first Champions League hat-trick. Crazy. So this is your top 8. Some surprises, some teams you would have expected to be there, but teams that really, really impressed this group. Now, they're followed up by the knockout playoffs. And this was, of course, 9 through 24. Now, bear with me, of course. Try and stick with me here. Atalanta got a draw against Barcelona. If they had just got a goal right at the end, they would have actually leapfrogged Aston Villa into the top 8. Borussia Dortmund, not in the best form league-wise. Of course, they've recently just fired Nuri Sahin, but they themselves were so close to being an automatic qualifier. They are right above Real Madrid and Bayern Munich, respectively. And these two are, again, sides that you would have expected to be in the top 8. Bayern Munich, I continue to have my reservations about them. Genuinely, I'm not sold on them. I'm not sold on Vincent Kompany. But Real Madrid are a team to look out for because, as we know, the start of the season was shaky. Kylian Mbappe, their big summer acquisition, didn't start the season the way everyone thought they would. But if you look at the form, if you look at the last 10 games for all of these teams, Real Madrid are a team that are quickly figuring it out. Game by game by game. And more importantly, Kylian Mbappe is figuring it out game by game by game. And we'll look at the round of 32 potential oppositions because Madrid could be faced up against the big hitter, they and Bayern Munich. And they're a team that we know in these competitions, they age like a fine wine, man. They just get better as the year goes on and on and on. So watch out for them. AC Milan missed a massive opportunity today against Dinamo Zagreb, losing. And if they had won today, they would have made the automatic qualifiers. Huge missed opportunity for them. PSV getting the result against Liverpool, the first team to beat Liverpool in this year's Champions League group table. PSG, I really want to talk about them down the line because seriously, I think they're cooking something over in Paris, but we'll leave that to later in the video. Benfica, AS Monaco, Stade Brestois, Brest playing in their first Champions League run. I don't think it's ever because I think Brest maybe like we're talking the Di Stefano days. I think we're a fixture in Europe. I don't want to say for sure. I don't know if it's their first Champions League run ever, but regardless, they qualify, which is huge for them. Feyenoord, Juventus. Feyenoord, by the way, getting smoked tonight by Lille 6-1, but they still did enough throughout this phase to go through. Juventus, their season, if you want to talk about Real Madrid going up and up and up, Juventus just continue to sink and sink and sink. And a loss to Benfica tonight leaves them in 20th in the table. Celtic, as we said, couldn't get the job done against Aston Villa. Manchester City, which were the big game tonight that everyone had their eyes on because we knew Man City, if they failed to win today, would have been eliminated from even making the knockouts. They just about got it done against Club Brugge. At one point, they were losing to them, but but the firepower got it done, and they're gonna have to hope that being able to register the likes of Marmoush, being able to register the likes of Kuzanov, can that kind of breathe new life into this team. Sporting, as we know, since Ruben Amorim was poached by Manchester United, they've been another team that have just sunk like a stone. Let's not forget, this was a team that put 4 past Manchester City earlier in the season. They were flying in this competition, and in all competitions since Amorim left the post, they have really struggled. But they make it by the skin of their teeth, as do Club Brugge, who again almost knocked out City themselves, but they get stuff done. And then just for the sake of giving them their flowers, or rather just covering them for one final time this competition, the sides eliminated at the first time of asking are Dinamo Zagreb, who really pushed. They really pushed. In fact, if Sporting had just conceded one more goal to Bologna tonight, Zagreb would have been the team to capitalize on that. Stuttgart falling short, Shakhtar, Bologna, Red Star, Sturm Graz, Sparta Prague, Leipzig, who I think are easily the biggest disappointments of this Champions League group, because they're a team that realistically, with all due respect to the likes of Shakhtar, Red Star, Sturm Graz, Leipzig should not be kind of rubbing shoulders with these teams. This team, in terms of the quality that they have, they should have been in the qualification places, and it's been a massive failure from their part. They're joined by Girona, Salzburg, Slavan Bratislava, and Young Boys, which finished with 0 points, which is crazy, but it is what it is. So that leaves us with, if you thought this was confusing enough, that leaves us with the bracket. But before we get into that, let me give you guys my initial thoughts on what is, of course, the first edition, the first ever Champions League group table. Rather than having 8 groups, the first time ever, UEFA decided to experiment with this table format. Here's my thoughts on it. The reality is, guys, I'm a little torn. I am a little torn. I'm very interested, by the way, to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Seriously, let me know what you guys think, how you thought this went. Were you a fan? Were you not? Because on one hand, I like the fact it was different. I do. The fact that on the last day of the Champions League group, we were all keeping an eye on all these games, and each team's fate was hanging in the balance, and one result saw Arsenal potentially having to face a potential round of 16 against Real Madrid or City, and the goal was disallowed, and instead they get a different opposition, and Barca and Liverpool were exchanging places, and Villa at one point were fighting with... It was interesting, and it was different. I do think in the past few years, the Champions League group stages with the traditional 8 groups has just become a little bit predictable, and you almost stop giving a toss after 4 games in each group or 6 games in each group, because more often than not, the big teams, they qualify first without even really struggling. In fact, last year, I remember this very specifically, because the round of 16 I thought was an absolute disgrace last year in the Champions League. It was the elite team versus the small team in almost every single game, bar Atletico versus Inter. That was the only game where genuinely 2 bigger sides in terms of status, in terms of quality, actually faced off in the round of 16. Other than that, it was a big team versus a less big team. And you might say, oh, well, you got to give them a chance. Every single one of the big teams beat the smaller team. There was no jeopardy whatsoever. And in fact, all of the big teams for the most part in the Champions League last year qualified. They did. Bar Man United, if you even wanted to call them a big team last year. But in terms of name, sure, fair enough. But for the most part, I thought the round of 16 was incredibly dull. And yes, it improved quarterfinals onwards, semifinals, final. But before that, I just think the Champions League group stage and even the round of 16 the last few years has just become extremely dull, extremely predictable. And for neutrals, for fans of the game, for consumers, if you want to call them that, it's just become 3-4 months of the footballing calendar that no one really feels invested in, because there's no jeopardy there. This was different. First of all, I really like the fact that we saw so many big games against really interesting teams in the likes of October, November, December. The fact that we got to see Man City versus PSG in the groups, Real Madrid versus Dortmund, a rematch of last year's final. Barcelona played so many big teams. PSG and Atletico Madrid had such difficult games against the likes of themselves. First of all, PSG had to play City, PSG had to play Bayern, PSG had to play Arsenal. We got to see Inter versus Arsenal. We got to see so many big games that typically we have to wait till the round of 16, the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the finals, basically January onwards. And even then, we're not guaranteed to see it. This year, we got the big games. I almost feel like it's a bit like UFC, where no one wants to fight each other, or boxing rather, excuse me. No one wants to fight each other. No one wants to take on the big fights. It's so difficult to see the best of the best square off. And I felt like the Champions League was really becoming sort of that. We never get to see the elite of the elite. And the Champions League should be about the champions. It should be about the biggest teams. And I get the small teams, they have to play each other as well too. But let's be real. Unless you're a fan of those teams, we're here to watch the best of the best square off. And I felt like this Champions League table, this new format, allowed us to see these premier matchups that otherwise we had to wait later in the calendar to see, and sometimes we're not even guaranteed to see it. Arsenal versus Inter is a fixture that we hadn't seen prior to this year since Henry basically demolishing Inter at the San Siro when Arsenal beat them 5-1. That's a fixture that we never get to see anymore. We got to see it this year. PSG Manchester City, to be fair, that's a fixture that over the last 5-6 years has really become heavily contested between the two of them. We got to see it again, this time early in the year. I think that's super interesting. It was something that I personally was a big fan of. Now, on the flip side, the whole thing that I kind of said against the round of 6, against the original Champions League group stage was the lack of jeopardy. And although jeopardy is portrayed in this year's Champions League, and although for the likes of City and PSG, they left it really late to qualify. At one point, they almost didn't. I do feel like although they portrayed this image of like, oh, anybody can beat anybody. If you look at this table, and I'm going to go back to it, let's be real, guys. All of the big teams found their way to the next round. Every single one of them. The teams that didn't qualify are the teams you would have expected to not qualify in the group stage, right? We can all agree to that. We would have all expected these teams to be eliminated. No one... Like, these guys, would they have qualified basically in an A group stage? Would they have? Probably not. Now, the flip side of it is like, oh, well, look at City. They were so close to not qualifying. And I guess the counter argument here, right? If I'm really looking at all the angles here, the counter argument is that City in the regular group stage would have been they would have been the first seed, and then they would have been up against the second seed, and then two teams probably from this elimination group, which is fair enough. So they probably still would have qualified much more easily than they did here. But the reality is they still qualified. Manchester City at one point couldn't buy a win, and they have still qualified. So it's more games, which ultimately, guys, let's try and look at it away from this angle of, oh, is it good or bad? UEFA decided to make this format to put more money in their pockets. More games, more matches on TV, more marquee matchups that they could kind of market their product around. Ultimately, they're the biggest winners here, right? Because there were way more games than normal. There were more eyes glued to the TV on the last day than normal. Today, I was watching the Twitter timeline. If you guys are on Twitter, every single 3 seconds you refresh your page, people are just watching every single game. And for UEFA, it's an absolute dream. Do I think it's a better product? I think I like it marginally better than the last one. Do I think it's perfect? Not really. Still, I personally, guys, I might sound really elitist here, but I still think there's too many teams here. Did we need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of these teams in the competition? And look, I get it's the UEFA Champions League. It's for all teams in Europe, so every team should have the right to. But I feel like 32 teams is okay. Here's the question. I like the fact that we've gone to a table. Did we need to expand it from 32 to 36 teams? Already, we had a lot of bottom feeders in the Champions League that, let's be real, we're just taking up spots for the sake of it. To add 4 more to it is I just feel a little bit unnecessary. Sorry if I sound like an elitist here. I'm not trying to be, but I feel like I'm all for participation of all teams as long as it's competitive. And quite clearly, we're seeing 1 win in 8, 1 win in 8, 1 win in 8, 0 wins in 8, which is crazy. 1 win in 8, 2 wins in 8. Like, I just feel like, yes, it's a league. I'm not trying to make this the Super League here, right? Everyone should have the opportunity to qualify for the Champions League. But 36 teams, I mean, what's next? 40 teams. I have similar concerns for the next World Cup that's going to have 42 teams. Like, it just seems like a lot. And it just seems like a lot of teams that are ultimately just there for the experience, which fair play to them. I mean, I'm sure for a lot of these teams, it's going to change their financial lives being in the Champions League for a few games. But I just feel like for the competitive standpoint, it's a little over the top. But that's just me personally. Let me know, seriously, what you guys think in the comments. I'm going to be reading all of them because I'm a little undecided here. Maybe you guys can convince me one way or another. And finally, let's take a look at the Champions League round of 32 and round of 16. What to expect. Now, I'm really confused about this. I'm going to be real honest with you guys. Now, of course, on Friday, the Champions League is going to be having their draw for who plays who, because as you guys can see, we're seeing, let me see if I can zoom in here. Okay, as we can see, right, on the first side of this bracket, Liverpool and Barcelona, as we know, are already qualified. So they're here waiting while these guys play. So PSG could play either of AS Monaco or Stade Brest. Benfica can obviously play one of the two as well, and vice versa. And the winners of those two, so basically it'll be PSG versus Brest or Monaco and Benfica versus Brest or Monaco. You'll have 2 separate games or two legs basically for each one of those games. The winners of both will advance, and one of them will play Liverpool, one of them will play Barcelona. So we could be seeing a PSG versus Barcelona or PSG versus Liverpool potential round of 16. We are definitely going to be seeing an all-French round of 32 game, which will be very interesting for Ligue 1 viewers. I'm looking forward to that one. The further down we go, Sporting and Club Brugge will be playing one of Atalanta and Borussia Dortmund. And then the two sides that advance from that will be playing against the sides that wait for them, i.e. Lille and Aston Villa, which really gives a huge opportunity for Aston Villa to potentially make a deep run at this, right? Like, if I'm an Aston Villa fan, of course, this depends on the future of their two strikers, and they definitely have to keep one of them, right? It does look like Duran might be leaving, but if Villa can keep the majority of their squad together, they should be looking at the likes of Borussia Dortmund, Atalanta, Sporting, and Club Brugge, and thinking to themselves, on any given day, especially with a second leg potentially at Villa Park, we could beat any one of these teams. Now, of course, going to Signal Iduna is difficult, and Atalanta are a top team. I'm not trying to downplay any of these sides, and Lille are here for a reason. But Aston Villa can really look at themselves and say, yeah, we could do something in this competition. Now, the most interesting thing to come out of this is Manchester City, Real Madrid, and Bayern all kind of being drawn in the same group, if you want to call it that. Now, poor Celtic here are going to have to play one of Real Madrid or Bayern Munich, which is just unfortunate for them. And that is, to be fair, a plus point for this group table, because if Celtic had just had one result go a different way, they might have been playing the likes of Club Brugge or the likes of Feyenoord or the likes of Juventus. And instead, they're unfortunate that they're sitting in the same kind of area as Real Madrid and Bayern. But let's be real here. Again, without being too elitist, Manchester City versus one of Real Madrid or Bayern Munich is the one to really keep an eye out, guys. That's insane. And then the winners of these games could be playing Atletico and Leverkusen. So yeah, to be fair, City have caught life in the fact that they've qualified, but wow, they're really up against a huge powerhouse. So yeah, that's going to be really interesting. Atletico Madrid and Leverkusen, waiting for either of them. These are really tough games, man. I think City, Real, Bayern, Atletico, Leverkusen, this is going to be the cream of the crop, man. I'm really looking forward to that. Further down we go, Arsenal and Inter have really, I think, struck gold here. Arsenal at one point, if they had drawn to Girona tonight, would have actually been in that Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, City territory, but they're not. Instead, they await the likes of Feyenoord, Juventus, AC Milan, and PSV. And I actually think this is pretty open, right? PSV putting in a big performance, obviously against Liverpool's B team today, but they're a strong side. Feyenoord have lost badly tonight, but they beat the likes of Bayern Munich. And Juventus and AC Milan in name are big teams, but on performance level this year haven't lit the world up. So I think there's a huge opportunity. And in the likes of Arsenal and Inter, I think these are real big hitters that will favor themselves against any of these teams and really should be looking deep in this competition because they are amongst the best ones. And then, yeah, I guess as well, too, on Friday, they're going to decide which one of these brackets is in which order. So who's playing. It's all a little confusing, to be honest with you. I need to do a little bit more research or maybe watch a few more videos, but it's very confusing stuff, man. I like the fact that it's different. And I think different at this point with the Champions League is good because I do think it got stale the last few years. But I need that one guy who works for UEFA, you know, when they do the draw, who explains how everything works. I need him to come through because this is all a little too much right now. But before we go, let me just give my thoughts on a few of these Champions League teams. Let me give a few awards, right? For me, most disappointing team in the Champions League this year. I said Leipzig, and they are disappointing because they didn't even qualify, but I think it has to be City. I think not saying City would be ridiculous, right? The fact that they've qualified by the skin of their teeth tonight, more power to them. And again, Marmoush, Kuzanov, that has to be a lift for them. It has to be, but I'm concerned for them, man. I think playing against Bayern Munich, playing against Real Madrid. Look, if City play at their max capacity, they can beat every single team in Europe. We know that. But as I said against Chelsea, you just never know what version of these players you're going to get. And it's startling to me more than anything how this side defends, because a few years ago, especially when they won the treble, this City team were one that you just got the impression they finally got it together defensively in Europe. You always knew City in Europe, they could score goals, but they were always leaking them. And Pep had just seemed to find the formula with his four really big center backs playing in a back four, Rodri playing in front of them. They were a defensive powerhouse as well as excellent going forward. And I'm watching them recently, and the amount of chances they concede, but also the ease of the chances they concede is just concerning, because it almost feels like they aren't taking the defensive side of the game as seriously as they were a few years ago. And I'll tell you what, for free, guys, you can't win this competition playing defense the way City are. So I am concerned for them. For me, they are the most disappointing team in this Champions League, but they got the job done and they will be playing in the next round. The most impressive team for me, obviously, Liverpool is the easy answer, right? They almost made history in becoming, well, they would have made history in becoming the first team to ever win 8 games in the group phase, obviously, because it's the first year. They did drop points today. They had some huge wins, beating Real Madrid, destroying Leverkusen, going to the San Siro. That's massively impressive. Barca, massively impressive group phase as well, too. I think Rafinha had an incredible run, but we'll talk about him in a bit. I do think it would be disingenuous for me, though, not to say Lille, because I think Lille, again, beating Real Madrid, beating Atletico Madrid, drawing to Juve, narrowly losing to Liverpool, and qualifying in the top 8, I don't think anybody would have imagined Lille would be in the top 8 of the Champions League, immediately getting a bye to the round of 16. So I think they deserve massive, massive credit. And for me, they're the most impressive story of this year's Champions League. Now, the team to keep an eye out for in the next round, without giving you the bait answers like Real Madrid, obviously keep an eye out for Real Madrid. Inter, I think, are a sleeper. I really think Inter, they are a traditional big team, but you know what I mean? Like outside of the Liverpools, the Madrids, the Bayerns, the bigger sides like that, Inter are a big team, but maybe people don't immediately jump to think of them. I think Inter are so well equipped to make a really crazy run in this competition because they're so well coached. They're so balanced. They know what they are as a team. They defensively are super, super strong, and they have goals all around the pitch. And I truly believe Simone Inzaghi is incapable of being out-coached, over two legs. So keep an eye out for them. But I'm going to shock you guys perhaps in saying that I think PSG are perhaps the team to keep an eye out for in the latter stages of this competition if they get there. Now, Vitinha made a point a few weeks ago of saying that he thinks this PSG side that he's playing with are actually better than the side of the last few years that contained the likes of Mbappe, contained the likes of Neymar, contained the likes of Messi. He said this team is a better side than them. And he got a lot of flack actually by saying that. But first of all, PSG are the only team in Europe's top 5 leagues still unbeaten. Keep that in mind. And I understand some people might say Ligue 1, but I mean, look, Brest are into the next round, Monaco are into the next round, PSG are into the next round, Lille just finished in the top 8. Ligue 1 is not an easy league. They're the only team in Europe's top 5 leagues to not lose a game. And then in Europe, they had the hardest fixture list going into this competition. Keep that in mind. Arsenal, Atletico, Bayern, Manchester City, like these are difficult games. And it definitely kind of took them a while to get going, right? But if you look at the way they're playing in the league, you look at the last 2 games against Manchester City, first of all, which was an incredible team performance, incredible in the second half. And then tonight as well, too, against Stuttgart. Again, a massive performance capped off by Dembele's hat-trick. And Dembele is the player to watch out for right now in Europe. We know Ousmane Dembele's talent is unquestionable. We've always known he's a premier talent in Europe, but it's always been the end product. It's always been the final touch with him. Well, this is a season where perhaps he's finally turning into the player we all imagined he had the potential to be, because in front of goal this year, the guy is absolutely lethal. We always knew he's a creative player. We always know he can create chances, beat his man. But when you're adding the efficiency to his game like Dembele is, he's an absolute threat. And keep an eye out for as well, too, the arrival of Khvicha Kvaratskhelia, because PSG already have a very talented attack. Their midfield is incredible in my opinion. And defensively, they take pride in defending. But you add, again, a prolific talent like Khvicha Kvaratskhelia. I think PSG could do something in this Champions League. I agree with Vitinha. It's not, in terms of the star names, as luxurious as the last few editions of PSG. But as a team, the way they all believe in themselves, the way they all operate as a unit rather than as individuals, this is the best PSG team I have seen in quite a long time. So let's keep an eye out for them. And finally, for my player of the Champions League group phase, I have to go with Rafinha. Now, sooner or later, we're going to have a conversation about Rafinha on this channel. It's not going to be today, but trust me, we are going to have a serious conversation about Rafinha because I genuinely think, especially in England, his season is going massively under the radar. But in the Champions League group phase this year, he came second in terms of most goals in the competition with 8, just 1 behind his teammate Lewandowski and, of course, Guirassy at Dortmund. And then in terms of his assists, the joint most assists in the Champions League this year with 5, tied with Frimpong and De Ketelaere. And some people will say, yeah, well, look at the attack that he's playing in. Barca are the best attacking side in Europe at the moment because Hansi Flick knows how to coach the hell out of an offense. And when you have Yamal, you have Lewa in the goal-scoring form that he's shown this Champions League. And then, of course, Rafinha. They're an attacking monster. But I don't think that should take away from Rafinha's numbers and take away from his exploits because he's a big part of that. He's the guy with, 13 goal contributions. And his play as well, too. You guys know, for me, it's not all about the numbers. Numbers count, but his play as well, too. He's playing the best football of his career. This guy is, at the moment, in the conversation for best player in Europe. I'm going to leave it at that. There are, of course, numerous candidates for that. Salah has put together a ridiculous campaign, and he'd be the front runner for the Ballon d'Or. But I seriously think Rafinha, especially in England, is being slept on. Because when it comes to numbers, performances, results, it's scary what the guy is doing at the moment. So he's my standout player of the Champions League group. Guys, let me know what you guys think of the entire first phase, how it went down, players that you took note of, teams that you thought were really impressive. Did you like it? Did you not? and what we need to keep an eye on going forward. Let me know what you guys think down below. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.